Hi everyone, thank you all so much for joining me for today's episode. Today I'm going to be discussing childhood gaslighting. So as parents, we are given the responsibility of building our child's sense of self. The words we say, the emotional nutrients that we give over to them, the messages that we send all have the potential to either build up the sense of self and allow the child to develop into an independent person, or they can break them down and ultimately annihilate this ability to build a sense of self. So because the child, while entirely dependent on the parent's existence, but at the same time has their own existence, has their own spirit, has their own needs, desires, and vision, they are their own person. This can be very tricky. So let me describe why this is so tricky. So the children's first few years of life, the child is, in essence, entirely dependent on the parent. The child looks up to the parent for their identity. They use the parent to emotionally regulate, and through the parent's mirroring and attunement, the child is able to identify who they are and ultimately develop a sense of self. So during this time, a parent needs to be aware of themselves. They have to have self-awareness, enough of which to know that the child is their own separate person. So in this instance, they can put themselves aside and learn about the child's needs by listening to them, attuning to their needs, allowing them to communicate as best they can so they can help meet those needs and help them develop the self. So with immature and narcissistic parenting, the parent is genuinely uninterested in the child, and they actually see the child as an extension of themselves. This selfish and narcissistic parent will be disappointed, threatened, angry, and even just hurt when the child doesn't reflect back to the parent who they are. So the parent in this instance is using the child to mirror back to themselves that they are enough, that they are worthy, that they are good parents. In essence, they have flipped the whole family system on its head. So as a result, the parent has now effectively sent a very deep message that the child's own existence, entire life, has been given over to them, to the parent. So in essence, the child is being avoided, neglected, rejected, and the child at that point starts to reject themselves and sees the entire purpose of their life to be of service to the parent and be good enough in the parent's eyes. Now, the reason this has to do with gaslighting is because the parent, in essence, is feeding the child a narrative about who they are that is false. And this is the same effect as gaslighting. In essence, gaslighting, you're feeding the victim a false narrative and kind of manipulating them to take that on. And ultimately that allows you to trauma bond them, allows you to pull them into your own narrative and control them and abuse them. So this causes the child and the eventual adult in this instance to be very confused about what is going on, very insecure about who they are, and ultimately just disconnect from their authentic self. So as a result of this, there's going to be a split between how the child feels and who they are and the narrative and the programming and the false and negative messages. And this is what I mentioned. This is the gaslighting that causes the child to be constantly confused as to who they are, start to question the reality, what is true. They become extremely self-doubting, and they ultimately, the tragedy is that they start to live out of alignment with their authentic self. Now, why would a parent gaslight their child? Why would a parent do this to their child? First of all, in many instances, they don't actually know they're doing it. But in the case of extreme narcissism and exploitive parents, they do know what they're doing. And what they're trying to do is hide their mistakes. They're trying to keep a family secret. Perhaps they're trying to hide their shame. If they're trying to manipulate the child to be a certain way that they want them to be, basically to make them look good as parents. If they're trying to hide the fact that they're using their child as a narcissistic supply. So all these are reasons why a parent would do this. As cruel as it is and absolutely bizarre as it is to use a child in this way, to exploit a child's helplessness and dependence and innocence in this way, that is what narcissistic abusers do. So this is the extreme. On a more basic level, and in many instances entirely not intentional, we are all guilty of gaslighting. And I myself have a child, so I see myself doing this at times, and I obviously identify it and work to correct it. But what we do is we communicate to our children in ways that kind of invalidates their feelings and their existence. We send hurtful and confusing messages to them, which serves to gaslight them into questioning their own feelings, their reality. And as a result, it makes them feel lost, abandoned, and tremendously insecure. So here are some of the things that we say that parents tend to say to their children, and they may not mean to hurt them, but when they say it, the child is very sensitive, and they're picking up on messages, and they definitely ingest a negative messages and a false idea, and therefore, ultimately, it serves to gaslight them. Some of those include, the feelings you're having aren't real, or what you're thinking isn't true, or you're too sensitive, or we are the adults and we know better and therefore you just have to listen. right? Or punishment with no explanation, or heavily focused on appearance, so many statements that might imply that all that matters are appearance or accomplishments to the exclusion of one's character and one's authentic self. So these kind of subtle comments and things that we do as parents, they send deep messages such as you shouldn't trust your feelings, or you can't trust yourself, or other people know better, or you are shameful, or you are ugly, or you are as good as you can act or accomplish. So these messages become a narrative, they become a program, and that program is false. It's out of alignment with our authentic self, and as a result, the effects are very similar to gaslighting. So on a fundamental level, anytime you tell your child something that makes them feel and therefore believe that what they're experiencing is not true, or something that is out of alignment with our authentic self, that would be gaslighting. So that's on a very fundamental, almost definitive level. So as a result of this, they have aligned themselves with a false belief system, which causes them to live out of alignment with their truth, with their truths, with their authentic self, and then therefore they become insecure and they become less confident about who they are as people. So like I mentioned, in many instances, this is not intentional, but it's so important as parents that we pay attention to how we speak and the messages that we may be giving over. And oftentimes we ingested these messages in childhood and we're just regurgitating the same thing to our child. So we have to kind of correct that so we don't give over those negative programmings and beliefs to our children and ultimately continue the programming and the intergenerational gaslighting. And regardless of the intention, the child who's experiencing this invalidation, this gaslighting, is going to have many devastating effects, and some of them include really hypervigilance and nervous around people, the inability to trust oneself, inability to trust other people, make decisions become very difficult, second guessing themselves constantly, having little confidence, terrified of vulnerability and being open, being intimate, extremely overthinking, relentlessly, hypervigilantly overthinking, trying to figure out where the next threat is, trying to figure out what is true, what is not, extremely confused in that way. So if you're a parent and you have found that you have done this to your child, it's so important to have compassion on yourself, because at the end of the day, you were probably gaslit. You were probably forced to ingest some truths from your parents who they themselves may not have realized that they were gaslighting. But it's important that if you have been gaslit, to challenge the narrative, to face yourself and identify core beliefs and dismantle those that are false and align with those that are authentic. This allows you to be more in the flow, more in touch with your intuition, with your authentic self. And this is what leads to confidence, and this is what allows you to align with your higher self and your goals and your dreams. So when we talk about a child who has been split off from their authentic self, this is usually what happened. No matter what kind of abuse occurred, or no matter if it was intentional or not, the child is now believing a narrative, and the narrative is not true. It's not in alignment with their authentic self, and it serves as gaslighting to the child. And as a result, they feel gaslit, they feel lost, they feel confused, and the effects last a lifetime until we go into the psyche. We dismantle these ideas and we challenge our parents and their narrative and identify if some of the things that were said were not true, some of the ways we interpreted it were not true, and allow us to align with our truths, which will effectively align us with our dreams, our goals, and our vision. Thank you all so much for joining me for today's episode. Until next time, all the best.